Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of personality. Today, I would like to talk with you about the topic unable to refuse about our desires. In one of my previous videos, I promised you that I would discuss this topic. Let's start from a bit further back. If you ask a person what they like to do, most likely they will give a formal answer. Something like, I like helping people, I like giving, I like taking care of others. And if you ask them, do you enjoy devaluing other people? They will say, of course not, I don't do that. If you ask them, do you enjoy doing nothing while everyone around you caters only to your needs? Or in some group, everyone serves only you. All the attention is on you. Everything is just for you. They will say, well, I'm not selfish. How could I possibly want that? Questions like these about this kind of pleasure affect people who see themselves as perfect and saintly the way holy water affects someone who is possessed. They immediately start to hiss and say, don't generalize about everyone. All people are different. I never do that. I don't devalue others. I only criticize bad, wrong people. And I love good people. And these people even feel personally offended. There is another group of people. With a psychopath smile, they might say, yes, I enjoy devaluing people, these little people. Or they might say, yes, I like it when everyone around me is fussing, everyone is running around. It's just great. These two categories of people that I've mentioned, they have almost no chance of changing. But if you are already prepared to confront and face your dark side, and you understand that inhumanity is something that destroys you, ruins your relationships, and blocks your potential because you cannot fully realize it due to your inability to build a benevolent, cooperative connection with others. If you are already at this stage, then this video is for you. Many people who begin to explore their inner world, for example, discover within themselves a tendency to devalue others. This is already a very high level. It is when a person no longer justifies it by saying, I am just telling the truth, or I only say this about bad people, not about good ones. Instead, they say, yes, I do devalue others. Such a person immediately gains the opportunity to recognize their own tendency to devalue, for example, when they do some work and then critically search for flaws in themselves, dismissing everything they have accomplished. They are unable to feel either satisfaction from their work or enjoyment during the process because they have a negative outlook. He wants to discover shortcomings rather than advantages. So this video is intended for people who are already prepared to face their own dark side. For example, when we devalue others, we will inevitably devalue ourselves in the same way. If we get angry at others for being wrong, we will also get angry at ourselves in the same way. In other words, we are exercising precisely that part of ourselves, the very mechanism that does this. And our psyche never does anything without a reason. That is, everything it does for pleasure, it's remarkable to realize that some of our unconscious dark desires actually bring us a great deal of pleasure. Those people who deny everything that in their view is wrong or bad are unable to change their lives because they are denying precisely what is preventing them from living fully. They reject, refute, and believe that they do not possess these traits. But that is precisely the reason. Or there are people who nurture their own shortcomings and believe that the stance of a beast who devalues everyone else is actually the highest level of development. These people also have no chance. As psychologists and psychiatrists say, psychopathy cannot be treated. But If a person is already truly willing to look carefully and honestly at what is commonly considered dark in a deeply human way, then they generally have a real chance to change their life, to gradually pull themselves out of the matrix in which they currently live. It is this pleasure that actually, in fact, prevents one from giving up many habits and patterns that are destructive and obstructive. Many people cannot accept the fact that attacking oneself, devaluing oneself, belittling oneself brings pleasure. But when we devalue, belittle, or find faults, in that moment, we feel a sense of superiority. And we do the same thing to ourselves. That is, it is as if we are devaluing something, but we identify ourselves with our sense of superiority. That part of us that would not have made these mistakes, that would have acted differently. This is why in our minds, various scenarios about the past often unfold where I could have acted differently, better, rather than the way my real self actually did. I could have done what I did better, not the way my real self did it. And when we analyze our wants and our abilities, we are directly coming into contact with our ideal self and our real self. When a person identifies themselves with their wants and desires, they are often convinced that what I want, I am also able to do. But what a person is actually able to do in reality, in fact, is what constitutes the real self. And it is not very appealing to identify ourselves with this fallible, vulnerable, limited inabilities person who has not developed their talents. We always have the option to escape into identifying with the one who can do whatever they want. What I want is what I can do. And that is why, in reality, many people end up living inside themselves. That is, in reality, their life is dull and uninteresting, but in their mind, it is completely different. This is exactly what we do when we watch movies about some beautiful life. At that moment, we seem to identify ourselves with that. It is between want and can, between these two concepts, that all problems arise. If we subtract can from want, we get a delta. This delta represents our dissatisfaction, our sense of mismatch. In other words, what I want and what I can do not align. And the greater this degree of mismatch, the more pain and anger we will experience. This discrepancy between what is desired and what is real becomes a very fertile ground for all sorts of pathogenic bacteria to grow there, for our pain and our anger to take root. In previous videos, I have often talked about how when things do not go our way, when want does not align with can, a person either suffers or becomes angry. But want seems to remain a sacred cow, something that is not subject to reconsideration. Let's break this down with a concrete example. Here in Kiev, the electricity is periodically turned off. And in my home, I have an electric stove. So when there is no power, I cannot cook anything. And so I get up in the morning, and for me, my morning cup of coffee is a kind of ritual. I really love it. And coffee is one of the incentives for me to get up. I tell myself, all right, stay calm. I don't feel like getting up. We'll just make it to the coffee and life will change. So I get up and realize there's no electricity and I can't make myself coffee. And at that moment, an entire drama unfolds in my inner world. That is, I have already formed my want, my intention, my desire, and I am unable to fulfill it. As soon as I cannot satisfy this desire or any other, I immediately fall into a sense of inadequacy. In other words, Satisfaction, the experience of being satisfied, is precisely the feeling of complete self-worth. But if I am unable to achieve this, I will instantly fall into a sense of inadequacy. In other words, I am essentially unable to meet my own needs. I cannot meet my own needs. And at this moment, a sense of hysteria begins to build up inside me in response to any desire. If my example with coffee is unclear to you, recall a time when you also wanted something and realized you could not have it. That is, a sense of hysteria grows inside. I have formed a desire that is, I have a certain image of what the morning should be like, of how I should drink my coffee, even though I went many years without drinking coffee and survived, thank God. But right now, this is how it is. And this desire, it seems to start living a life of its own. In other words, it already becomes something separate from me. I become a slave to this desire. And the inability to satisfy it begins to provoke a growing emotional intensity. In fact, when we decide to do something, we have already imagined how we are going to do it. A want bubble has formed within us. At that moment, we automatically start to come under the pressure of this want. That is, if I do not have the skill to change my own needs, to reconsider them, I simply generate them. I project my desire and do not realize how I am doing it. So I risk becoming a slave to this want, no longer able to either cancel or change it. We began our meeting today by talking about deriving pleasure from something. And if we do not bring these unconscious wants and pleasures into our awareness, we risk getting caught in the whirlpool of our own unconscious desires, which spin us around and push us toward actions that we seemingly do not need. This projection of what is desired is similar to giving yourself a command. That is, you automatically give yourself the order, I want coffee, make coffee. And if this desire is not acknowledged, not recognized as our own, then it becomes almost like a ruler over our psyche. I think each of you, even when you intellectually understand that what you want is actually harmful to you, that you need to give it up, that you need to stop, have found yourselves unable to do so. In other words, this emotional reaction to dissatisfaction is part of our physiology. It is the instinct of self-preservation that saves us. In other words, I want something and we automatically start acting to fulfill it. We may not notice this, but we encounter it when we are unable to get what we want. In fact, this is when the emotional intensity begins to build. And this does not even resemble a crying child demanding what they want. It is more like an animal that is doing everything it can to get what it needs. It is in fact an animal. This mechanism is not the desire itself, but the moment of its execution. And at that point, we immediately find ourselves under our own pressure. That is, at the moment when I realize I cannot make myself a coffee, my emotional intensity rises because it signals there is a need, no satisfaction. There is a need, no satisfaction. And it screams, no satisfaction. Give me satisfaction. And the psyche wants finally to let go of this and discharge. It is mobilized in order to fulfill what is desired. And this mobilization begins to intensify because what is desired is not present. I think all of you have encountered this panic that builds up inside. For example, when you can just say, okay, I'm taking my keys and leaving the house now. The keys are missing. And inside, a growing panic mobilizes us to search for the keys. Do it. Look for them. You must. And sometimes people don't realize their desires, so they don't understand why their anxiety is rising. That is, the moment when what is desired does not match reality mobilizes the psyche so that the person can correct the situation. But the person may not even understand this because, for example, in order to understand, let's say I enter a new group of people, for instance, and I notice how my anxiety is increasing. In other words, my instinct for self-preservation is telling me we need to get out of here. These are unfamiliar people and therefore they are dangerous. If I do not recognize this fear, this sense of danger, then the anxiety will overwhelm me and start to take control. Essentially, we end up attacking ourselves. At the moment when I realized there was no way to make coffee, I became aware of the growing emotional pressure I was putting on myself. I tell myself, Olya, you have started attacking yourself with your own desire. It must be cancelled. This ability to let go of what you want, to reconsider your desires, is a skill. It's like a muscle that needs to be trained. The most unhappy people are those whose desires are this big, but whose abilities are only this much. They experience the most pain and the most anger. That is why idealists are often the most ruthless, because it is an attempt to force the world into this small, perfect box of your own, one that does not allow for any imperfections, and that is what makes a person ruthless. They have squeezed themselves into it and are trying to squeeze the whole world in as well. So the first point is that I attack myself with my desires. When some kind of internal hysteria arises, for example, you have to keep yourself under control. For example, I come into a group of people. I want to run away because my instinct for self-preservation tells me they are dangerous, they are unfamiliar. Let's leave, but I have to stay. So at that moment, control rises up against our hysteria. This tension that people feel indicates that there are too many emotions. When we experience hysteria, when this emotional storm rises up, if you haven't gone through this chain, haven't understood what your need is, what exactly you want right now, then you may not be able to remain more or less adequate. Because of control, a kind of freezing occurs. From this freezing, emotions begin to intensify even more, wanting to be seen and satisfied. And control begins to tighten even more. And this confrontation is exhausting. That is, people who do not understand their own emotionality, who do not understand which desire it comes from, but only suppress and control it, will generally prefer to interact with others as little as possible. Even if they do interact, it tires them out. And control can be released, it can be reduced. For example, let's imagine I'm spending the night at a friend's place. I want to have some coffee. And my friend says, the power is out, there won't be any coffee. And I realize that right now, getting upset or anxious is pressing on me. It's not appropriate. So I start to restrain it with control. But this aggressiveness will still come out somewhere. There is a person has already generated these emotions, and even if they restrain them through control, they will still need to release them somewhere later. This is that hardening, this fear of one's own emotionality. It's a fear because, you see, you need to follow the chain and realize that, like a child, you want to throw a tantrum and demand coffee, or like an animal. You can't explain to an animal that there is no electricity or that you don't have money to buy food. Isn't that right? We understand that an animal simply won't comprehend this. And that's why an animal cannot grasp the idea that it needs to wait. An infant cannot wait either. And we become that beast which starts to attack itself. Attack, attack, give me, give me, give me, give me. When we understand this pleasure, we begin to see why we are attached to certain things. For example, having a drink of alcohol. In that moment, the self-aggression disappears. I experience pleasure, a sense of release, a feeling of permissiveness. Or, for instance, playing a game of marbles on the phone. In that moment, there is pleasure because I am doing something as if, and I am winning. I am winning. I have the chance to win. I am detached from everything, from all the problems that exist. I have run away from everything, hidden myself in this game. In other words, it is pleasure. Pleasure is a need that one is unable to refuse right there. The more honest a person is with themselves, the more chances they have to take control of their life. If it is impossible to look inside oneself, then a person becomes such a predictable machine that reacts to everything in the same way. I hope you found this interesting. Share your insights. You have watched the video. What situations came to mind for you while watching? How were you able to reconsider your desires and, as a result, reduce tension as well as aggression and pain? What desires have you reconsidered in general? This lack of synchronization with reality, the inability to adapt flexibly to changing circumstances, overall indicates a rigidity of personality when a person is still not ready to part with their subjectivity and live in the external world rather than the internal one. When a person reconsiders their desires, they always have the feeling of falling from the sky to the ground, as if they have to give up something that rightfully belongs to them. In reality, though, in their mind, it is not that important. I will say goodbye to you now. See you next time. Goodbye.